So on the registration screen, we're going to use a test teacher because it's going to give us an interface that looks like what a teacher would see. I'm going to put in a very simple password, 123, 123. I'm going to click on the Terms of Service Agreement box, or else you can't go through. In fact, let's try that out. It says Terms of Agreement is required, so we might want to change that. The Terms of Agreement themselves, we've got to take a look at that as well, but we'll pass on that for this particular video. Click on Register or hit Enter, and it'll take you to your account settings. I'm going to update the password here, and now here we can change the profile settings. We have to hit Edit Profile. You can change the name, first name, the last name. You can't change the email. That is your login ID. You can add a phone number, and you can change the password. For preferences, we only support themes. We can change the light theme, and you can change the dark theme. We'll be adding preferences as we add functionality to the app. Next, we'll take a look at the schedule, and after that, we'll take a look at the roadmap. The schedule is the primary interface that teachers will be using. So from the top left, we have a drop-down list, which allows you to jump to any week in the school schedule. You also have a button that'll allow you to go back a week, and a button that'll allow you to go forward in a week, as well as a button that lets you jump to the current week. Next, after that, we have the course selector. By default, you are looking at the course schedule. We can also look at each individual course by selecting it from the drop-down list, and it will change the interface to a lesson schedule. We'll see how that works as we go through the tutorial. After that, we have the templates. Here you can save and manage templates. We'll also see that as we go through the tutorial. The next row are the headers for all of the days within the school week, starting on Monday and ending on Friday. Each of these headers controls a column, and each of these columns has a set of drop-down menus where we can select functions that affect the items in the column. For right now, we'll start adding lessons. That brings up the course selection dialog. You can select one by one or select all of them in one shot. Hit accept. It will then create lesson bubbles, one bubble for each of the course that you are going to be teaching. We can then rearrange these by dragging and dropping them into place, and then we can copy them as well to the next day, potentially changing their order as well, or you can just take this one pattern and repeat it across the entire week, and now you have a fully scheduled week. We can now save that as a template. We'll call this one week A. Then we can move to the next week, and we can actually apply that to this week by selecting it from the drop-down. That now sets up this week with that entire pattern. We can also change the pattern in this, assign it throughout the entire week, and then we'll change that, and we'll save that as template B. This is going to now set us up to a alternating bi-weekly schedule. We can also modify this and say that, let's say on Friday we don't have any lessons, so we can delete that entire column. Oh, sorry, I went back. Sorry. So we'll delete this column, and now we are Friday free, and we will save this again as week B. This way you can alter your templates and save them and then resave them so you don't have to create new ones and get all out of shape. So now let's start applying these to other weeks. Let's move to the next week, and we will apply week A. We're starting the cycle over again. And you'll notice how the PDD and the holidays are skipped over whenever you apply a template, so you're not scheduling something on a day you shouldn't be. Move to the next week, and let's now apply week B because this is the second week, and we can see that the Friday is set free. Now we have 4 complete weeks that have already been kind of scheduled out. What we want to do now is actually fill in those lessons. So if we left click on any of these bubbles, it takes us to the lesson detail page. And on this page, on the far left on the top, we also have that same drop down, which has the same functions, but it only works on one specific lesson. We also have the course indicator. You can go down the list, you can go up the list. Similarly with the date indicator, you can go forward in the date, you can go backwards in the date. And the 3 buttons to the right here are for navigation. They will take you through to several different screens. We'll also see that play in as we move into the tutorial. more into the tutorial. Next, we have the fields. We have the benchmarks, the objectives, the activities, and the materials. These actually can be changed in the manager, but we will talk about that in a different video. For right now, to add a benchmark, you just left click onto the benchmark box. It'll bring up the Assign Benchmarks dialog. By default, the subject that you are editing is automatically selected in the drop-down, but you can always change the subject that you want to configure to draw benchmarks from, as well as the same thing happens with the grades. The grades will follow the current lesson plan, the current lesson that you are editing, but you can always change and pick benchmarks from a different grade. Here in the keywords, we can type in a keyword such as fractions, hit enter, and it will now only show those benchmarks with fractions or whatever keyword you want that are in their description. Finally, the hide assigned and show assigned drop down allows us to control what is visible in the screen. Basically, anything that has already, any benchmark that has already been assigned will, if you're using hide assigned, will drop away from the view. And this will allow us to shorten the list so that especially at the end of the year when you've assigned so many, you don't have to sift through so many different benchmarks, potentially reassigning a benchmark that you had already assigned previously. We'll see how that works as well in the next example after this. So right now we're going to take these two. As you can notice, you can have multiple selections. Once you hit accept, it adds them to the benchmark box. We can delete a benchmark just by clicking on the X, and then if you want to add another one, you just click again on that box and it'll bring up the Assign Benchmarks dialog. So you can also double click. So if we double click that, it just adds it to the list. So now I'm just going to put some text in here into these boxes. The actual text is probably going to be something more relevant. We're just looking for a mechanical example right now so that we can see stuff on the screen. So that does it for Monday. So now let's move over to Tuesday. In Tuesday, we're going to actually start using this hide assigned drop-down and show you how it will now display all of the previous ones that you have already assigned. These are going to be marked out. As you can see, the code is struck out, and then the text is dimmed, basically indicating you've already got this in another lesson. However, there's some times where we might want to repeat the lesson on the second day, so we can then select it still. Now in this example, I'm also going to bring in a benchmark from another subject just to show how you can combine different subjects into the same lesson. So now we have them both up there in the benchmarks. I'm going to also update the objectives so that we can see how we have combined concepts together. That's Tuesday. So now for the remaining week, I'm just going to fly by and just add in really quickly these lessons, these benchmarks. We'll go to Thursday. Same thing. And finally on Friday, we'll do this one last one. Okay, so now let's go back to the course view, or the course schedule, and we can see that those sections that we had populated in the lesson detail now appear in the lesson bubbles. Hovering over those bubbles, we can see the contents of those sections. This now gives us a heads-up view of what's in these lessons without having to obscure the current interface with a lot of data, as well as not forcing us to actually have to go into the detail to find out what the contents are. So now we can take a look at a schedule view, a lesson schedule, I mean. So we can either do it from the drop-down, or we can do it from the bubble menu. So by clicking on the lessons item in the bubble menu, that takes us to the lesson schedule view. This is now a more tabular, a tabular format that is very similar to a lot of the spreadsheet formats that many teachers use, which is convenient because it allows you to see the progression of your lessons as you go throughout the week. This interface works very much the same as a lesson detail in that you can just click on a specific area like benchmarks and it'll open up the Assign Benchmarks dialog, and you can just add as you would do in the lesson detail. You can also delete. You can also link out to the source. We can take this information and then you can edit inline in this view the data. So you can also go around here and you can say homework, page 224A to F. Okay. So this interface is also very convenient for filling out an entire week of lessons as well. let's do that right now. Let's go up into the courses view again, and let's actually work on the English course. So we will click on lessons here, or we can do it from here. Let's actually do it from here. And now, very quickly, you can just select on your benchmarks and then add your benchmark and your objectives. And for the rest of them, I'm just going to go very quickly, just whip them all up. This, again, just to give us an idea of what it's going to look like. Let's go back to the courses. And now you can see that the second row has now been filled in. Some teachers might want to work on a daily basis, going down vertically instead. So we can do the same thing. We can go from, we'll start at the top left. And then this time we just use the course indicators. And we click down, that goes to the grade 4 English. Now we are at social studies, which hasn't been configured yet. So we can now configure that. We go down again, we go to science, we can then configure that. And when we click down again, it's going to go back to math, which is at the top, but it's going to move to the next day. We can see that as if we go to the courses. So it's just going to wind its way down. So if you would rather do it that way, you can do it that way as well. Now we'll get into some advanced functions, namely bumping. Sometimes we need to move all the lessons from one day and onwards back a day. Either there was a storm and the school had to close for the day, or perhaps the teacher was absent and we couldn't find a substitute teacher. So to do that, we go down to the bump lessons function or option. And by default, the site will then select the next day, since that's usually what's going to happen. You just want to only bump one day. So in this case, we're going to take it. So it's going to take it to February 13th. So now notice now how all of the lessons from the 12th have been moved over. And in fact, if you move to the next week, everything was also pushed over to the next Monday. Note as well that the lessons themselves are still there. The bubbles are still there to take into account situations in which you want to move the dates over. You don't want to get rid of the actual lessons, because you're actually going to reschedule something in between. Let's say you forgot there's a day that you needed to add a set of lessons. You can just bump that and then reschedule those lessons inside without having to set them up or add them to the schedule. If you really don't want them, you can always just delete the lessons. It'll prompt you if you really want to do that, and then it'll remove them from the interface entirely. Another use case is if we had to move these lessons several days off. So for example, let's say there is construction in the school and the place will be closed on February 13th, 14th, and the subsequent Monday. So what we can then do is we can then bump again, and instead of taking the default, we will now select the 18th, which is the Tuesday, because we can't be there on the Monday. So once we select that, when we click accept, note how the page will change to the date that you had moved to. So it's always following where it is that you want to go. We can go back a week and we can see that the 13th and the 14th have been emptied and everything else has been moved over to the Tuesday. It skipped the Monday. Another useful function is moving. This is actually better seen if we look at it in the lesson schedule. So we'll choose the math. Now, the thing about moving is that lessons, if you move to a date that already has a lesson, it will not overwrite that lesson. It will actually merge the two together. So let's say we're going to move the grade 4 math on February 19th to the 20th. We then specify the date to be the 20th. We hit accept, and you'll see that the benchmarks were added, and then the secondary, the new one was appended to the end of the objectives. Now, there is no undo. So basically, if you made a mistake, you're going to have to manually move them back. But hopefully that type of a situation is not going to be common. Most of the time when you want to move something, it really does move it. If we go back up to the courses view, we're going to see that only the math was moved over. So when you're in the lesson schedule, you're only going to affect all of those items in that one lesson. You don't have to worry that you're going to mess up any other subject. This also happens when you're doing it from the lesson view, the lesson detail. So if we go into lesson detail, we go into the action and we say move this over to the 20th. It will move it to the 20th, and you can see how the date has updated. You can now also see how the two benchmarks have been merged. And if we go over to view courses, now we can see that the English has also been moved over. Copy works in the same way, except it just will not delete or it will not reset the previous date. So for example, we're going to move from the 18th, we're going to copy from the 18th to the 19th. And you can see how both of them actually look the same. We can look at the lessons and you can see how they are exactly the same. This is useful for situations in which you know that you are going to be teaching this subject for multiple days, or at least 2 days in a row. Okay, so finally I want to go through the differences between clear and delete. Clear will only remove the lesson contents. So if we were to clear whatever's on the 19th, we can clear these lessons. And as you can see, they're emptied, but the lesson bubbles still remain. So this is a good way if you want to reset something, you didn't do it right and you want to just reset that day without having to get rid of all the bubbles, you can just hit clear. If it is a situation in which there's nothing going on there, you can then delete the lesson as well. There is going to be another improvement that's coming in very quickly, in which you can then say reserve that day as off. So when you delete, you can then say don't ever schedule anything on that day. That is good for something. Let's say you had an appointment that you know in the future, you can then reserve that day. And even if you're bumping and moving and everything, it'll take that day into account that it's not supposed to be scheduled on. So now we're going to get into the roadmap. The roadmap interface gives you statistics on the benchmark assignments that you've done so far. It shows you the coverage, basically how many benchmarks you have actually assigned. So in this particular case, only 7.4% have been assigned because only 13 benchmarks have been assigned out of 176 in total. Below that, we have a breakdown per subject. So this way we can find out the percentage as well as the actual number of the benchmarks that have actually been assigned for that subject. By selecting one, you can also, by selecting this, you can then view the benchmarks, the actual benchmarks that were assigned, and that brings you with this list. You can view all of them in one shot, or you can focus in only on those that have not yet been assigned. The teachers can then use that as a guide to find out what next do they have to assign, as well as you can view all of the ones that you've already assigned. This way you can review what it is that you have already taught so that you can find out maybe you need to reinforce something, or you don't need to do a specific lesson. Also, in this view, it shows you the lesson that it was actually scheduled on. So, for example, ELA 4.C.1.1 was scheduled on February 10th for grade 4 English class. We can then go directly to that, and just by clicking on the bubble there, and it brings you to the lesson detail. From here, you can now move to view the courses. You can also go back into the lessons, and you can go straight over to the roadmap yet again. Notice that when you go back to the roadmap from either a lesson schedule view or from a lesson detail, let's look at that right now, that line will be highlighted in blue to give you a context of where you just came from, so that you would know that, okay, if you're trying to find out where you are in your English, at least if you had to go back and forth to the roadmap, you know what it was that you were looking at and what the reason that you were there for. We can also add lessons from this one interface. So if you were to just hover over one of the lesson cells, you can even do it with an existing or with an open cell. And basically, you just have to specify the date. So let's put this on the 19th of February. Hit escape. It'll add the bubble to the lesson roadmap, and then we just have to click on that, and now you are in that newly created lesson. You go back to the view courses. Now you see a context of where it was that you added, words you added. And you can also go and see its lesson and start working on it that way. So that's it for the teacher interface. Next video, we will have the admin interface, in which we can actually view other teachers' schedules and roadmaps without having to actually log in or ask their permission or do anything else like that. So that'll be in the next video.